Who is doing the manufacturing?
Anybody who is seeking totalitarian mind control. So it can be a regime, it can be a cult, it can be a terrorist group, it can be a faction of left-wing loons in our own country. It really depends on the phase that you're in. And I try to break this down when I approach this book. Megyn, the initial idea behind it, or rather why I was thinking about this in the first place, was people will talk about things like climate change, and they'll say this is the biggest threat that we face. Or they'll talk about, I don't know, we're going to all run out of water or something. The biggest threat that we as a species face is mass hysteria and mass delusion. And I think that's been the case for a very long time. Certainly the 20th century showed that that was the case, and I hope we don't have to relearn that lesson in the 21st. But it's essentially when people go mad in masses or in herds. And this is done often intentionally. There are people who can control this. There are tactics that are used. And I get into, and the book is really about chapter by chapter, various approaches to this kind of mind control, whether it's the Soviets, the Chinese, I said a bunch of different cults that I talk about, and also takes you a little bit into the earliest days of the brain stimuli to the outside, or rather stimuli from the outside to the brain connection that Pavlov, the Russian scientist, developed in the early 20th century. So there's a lot to go through in it, but it's certainly, there's a whole chapter on menticide and about the transgender situation, which is menticide obviously being mind killing. That's exactly what we're seeing in this country, menticide.
I think it's so interesting because I love anything involving cults, first of all. And this really shows, like you talk about many infamous cults like Jim Jones, people drinking the Kool-Aid, taking their own lives, convinced that doom and gloom was awaiting nuclear attacks and so on. And then you liken it to what's happening today. And when you watch like the lunacy on the streets of Minneapolis, is it so different from being in the Jim Jones cult and being convinced that, you know, you have everything to fear? The Gestapo's here. Like these ICE agents, they're locking people up. They're stopping innocents and throwing them away without a key. American citizens. The through line, it didn't really dawn on me until I read the book on exactly how the same tactics are being used only on American citizens.
Well, you know, Megyn, this is why I draw upon, and I had the CIA. I'm absolutely contractually obligated if I write about CIA operations I was a part of. For the first time ever, I've written about them. I wrote about going after Boko Haram. It was actually called something else at the time. Boko Haram in Nigeria and Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then, of course, various, whether it's the Taliban, Al-Qaeda remnants, and the Haqqani network in Afghanistan. But one thing that I found fascinating, and then I had some time at the NYPD doing counterterrorism there, you would have people who would show up in Iraq or in Afghanistan, and they were willing to blow themselves up in countries they had really never been in before, spent a very short amount of time in, to kill people they had never met because of a cause that they only recently became aware of, and often through online means. So if that's possible, if it's possible to have some kid who grows up in Birmingham in the UK and goes, you know what, I'm going to fly to Turkey, make my way into Syria, go across into Iraq, and try to blow up as many people as possible to fight against they always would call them the Crusaders and Jews, the Christians and Jews in Iraq, then it must be possible for this to be happening elsewhere in different ways, at different levels, perhaps not quite as violent, but also using the same process. And that brings me to Minneapolis. How do you get, suburban, middle-aged, seems mostly, in the case of Minneapolis, white women, to think that they should be blocking ICE officers with their body, that they're stopping Nazis, that they should spit at them, or that they should, physically throw themselves in the midst of law enforcement
try to run
operations?
them over.
This is crazy. I mean, this is a word that is applicable. This is crazy. There's something has happened to their mind. And I mean, I get into, like, menticide is based on artificial breakdown and deconditioning. So the artificial breakdown is, and in the case of the trans situation, this really hits home. It's getting you to just believe. It's the belief in the most core and fundamental lie and to give up all that you have believed in before, or give up all on this issue you thought you knew, and then it can be reconstructed. Reconditioning to the new order is what they call it. And this is what you see where people not only are led to believe that you can't tell the difference between a man and a woman, or that a baby is assigned gender at birth. Think about what a crazy, I mean, we've all on the right been making jokes about the pronouns thing for a long time. And I think we realize now it's actually very, very, I mean, I've done that too, but it's actually gotten quite serious, as we see with more and more of these mass shooting incidents involving trans individuals. But, you see this and you say, hold on a second, if I can't tell the difference between a man and a woman, or rather, if I'm willing to have someone else tell me that there is no difference biologically, we can't tell the difference, what else am I open to? What other kind of persuasion, what other kind of rewriting of my basic circuitry is possible?
Yes. That's such a good way of putting it. Rewriting of my basic circuitry. That's truly what the trans thing does. Mm-hmm. And like when they make you say she, when you are looking at Dylan Mulvaney or you're looking at Leah Thomas and this is a he, this is a man, or these enormous guys who come into the women's locker room or the women's bathroom, and they are trying to make you say she belongs there. And your circuitry tells you It's a lie. International disputes, inflation, rising national debt, digital currency. There is a never-ending list of reasons gold has risen over 700% in the last 20 years. And a never-ending list of reasons smart Americans diversify a portion of their savings into precious metals with Birch Gold Group. Gold can thrive during uncertainty, which is why it is a crucial part of a balanced strategy. It gives you peace of mind given all the events that could impact the U.S. economy. See if holding gold in a tax-sheltered retirement account is right for you. Birch Gold can help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold. Just text MK to the number 989898 to receive your free info kit on gold. There's no obligation, just useful information. With an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and tens of thousands of happy customers, consider letting Birch Gold help you diversify with gold, so you too can have peace of mind regardless of the uncertainty. Text MK to the number 989898.
And this is why I start off the whole book with the initial, some of the initial research, and then this famous research about Ivan Pavlov. And now this is somebody who got a Nobel Prize for Science, had to do with gastric juices and digestion, actually. But this guy comes along. He's the most famous Russian scientist of all time, and Russia's actually produced some pretty darn good scientists. And he came along and he goes, well, hold on a second. I can prove that what your brain processes has actual physical effect in the body. And so his life's work really was trying to understand that at a time when really there was almost no understanding of this, right? And they're talking about the very end of the 19th century, early 20th century. But there's a fascinating situation that occurred where his lab, he's had a bunch of different labs over the course of his career, but there was a lab in St. Petersburg, Megyn. And as we all know, he kept dogs. He didn't actually, people always say that he would ring a bell. It was actually a buzzer or a metronome. There's a lot of stuff that is sort of like the lore of Pavlov versus the truth. I get into some of that. But this is all true. He had a lab, and there was a flood. And the dogs, and I love dogs, you love dogs, like this, like, it gets me upset just thinking about it. The dogs, when the flood was going up and up and up, realized that it was very likely that they were in cages, and they were all going to drown. Some workers from the lab got into Pavlov's lab and were able to release these dogs just in time, and noticed extreme changes afterwards in their behavior. Essentially, that trauma was so profound in dogs that some of them that had been a little aggressive became far less aggressive and timid. Some of them that had been really friendly became quite ferocious toward members of staff. They had the circuitry had changed because of a fear stimulus. Now, I know we think about this stuff more now, but 100 years ago, that was a eureka moment. It was, wow, you can actually take externalities, in this case, a natural phenomenon, but you could then force it perhaps and make people change behavior based upon things in their environment and get physiological changes from that as well. So that is a huge transformation in our sense of where the brain and our psychology ends and our physiology and our bodies begin. And this matters so much, obviously, in the trans debate in a whole bunch of ways, because if you can submit on this issue and give up the most fundamental understanding of biology that I think really all of us have, that is a huge step in this process of getting people to be willing to say absolutely anything. That is what these are the outside stimuli. Use the pronouns. Say you don't know. You're constantly undermining your own cognition, your own ability to think through these problems. And that's why they're so insistent on it. And by the way, the Soviets knew this, and I get into this history in the book. The Chinese during the Cultural Revolution knew this as well. They were insistent upon the constant barrage of falsehoods. Even if they knew, Megyn, you didn't know it, and this gets into Mao. By the way, the term brainwashing, which is a whole chapter on, comes from it's like a Chinese neologism, which is wash brain, and they switched it around. A journalist named Edward Hunter, who was familiar with what had happened in the early days of the Chinese Cultural Revolution, says, this is crazy what they're doing over there. And there's been some amazing studies. There's a guy, Robert Lifton, who wrote a study of all these people, including some Westerners, by the way, who were just completely rewritten by this process of Chinese brainwashing over time. And it's very clear. There's a very sort of structured process to it. And this is how they thought they were going to, and it worked in a lot of cases. And this is how they seized control of the populace in China. This is what Stalin was had a little bit of a different approach. The Chinese kind of built on that, but this is what they did there. It's what they do in North Korea today. Everybody has to use the preferred phrases. Everybody has to bow in front of the emblems or the posters or whatever.
Yeah.
Because even if you don't believe it,
what we
Megyn,
do on the American left today, too. Here's
exactly
just
right.
reminding for the listening audience, we're talking to Buck Sexton. The name of his book out today is Manufacturing Delusion, How the Left Uses Brainwashing, Indoctrination, and Propaganda Against You. And as you're talking, Buck, I'm thinking about the mass hysteria around BLM. And the surveys by the asking far left liberals how many unarmed black men are killed by police in a year. And some said over 10,000, right? And it was 12, over 10,000. They've been so deluded. I'm thinking about the climate change hysteria with, yes, of course, Greta Thunberg. But she's a good example because she was a kid, she's kind of turned into a bit of a villain, but she started off as just a deluded kid who was brainwashed by this same set of psychos, including people like Al Gore and Bill Gates and others who influenced that sect. Now it's AOC, et cetera. And then most recently, COVID. COVID is like that trauma that the dogs suffered that you write about in Manufacturing Delusion, where the water was rising, not for normies, but for lefties who convinced themselves that this was like the end times and that we were all almost about to die. And people like, forgive me because she's a minor, but Violet Affleck, who's still going back to the UN in her mask, demanding that we all wear the masks so that we don't die from a resurgence of some COVID strain. Like, it is, as you write, a manufactured delusion, and it was intentional.
COVID was really the beginning of the idea for the book, Megyn, because I kept looking around, as many of us did, as I think so many of us did, and saying, okay, guys, explain to me why the wearing, and it's not a COVID book to be clear, but there's a chapter where I deal pretty extensively with this. And it is, by the way, the wearing of the mask is very much like use the preferred pronouns. Even if they know you don't believe, and even if you're doing it under protest, the act of submission itself continuously is part of the process of that rewiring or rewriting. But
it's making my blood boil.
Yeah. And I just remember people saying things like, well, put on the mask for the walk to your table. I'm like, in a small restaurant, I'm going to walk 15 feet to a table, have to put my mask on for that. But then when I sit, it's okay. Or close a bar at 10 o'clock.
That's right.
This is crazy. That is the only word. This is nuts. And Fauci, who I find to be a vile coward and have absolutely nothing but contempt for him professionally and what he did, Fauci and all the rest of them like, this is why it's manufactured. They found these things and these rituals to be useful tools of control. And there's all these different approaches to how you get people to think and to mobilize around lies, falsehoods, crazy ideas. Again, that is the meat of the book, and that's why I wanted to write it, because I really wanted to say, the book was like, what happened to you people? Why do you go so crazy? Including people that I knew who I had always thought were pretty normal.
Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.